single mom gave a man a ride in heavy rain, not knowing he was the one she'd been searching for? Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Joanna Brennan was elbow deep in cardboard boxes at the back of her bookstore when the rain started coming down, like someone upstairs had just given up on subtlety and decided to empty the whole sky in one go. It was that kind of September storm that hits central Pennsylvania out of nowhere. The kind where you're unpacking used paperbacks one second and the next you're watching the street outside turn into a river with leaves and trash floating past the window like some kind of suburban rapids situation. She'd sent Lily home with Mrs. Chen from upstairs an hour ago, thank God, because this closing shift was dragging on forever, and the last thing her 10-year-old needed was to be stuck here watching her mom wrestle with inventory and outdated book catalogs until 9 at night. The bookstore, which Joe had optimistically named Second Chapters 3 years ago when she'd signed the lease, was barely keeping itself alive these days. And she spent most evenings like this one trying to figure out how to stretch another month out of numbers that really didn't want to cooperate. The problem with running a used bookstore in a town that was slowly forgetting how to read anything longer than a Facebook post was that you ended up taking in way more books than you could ever sell, just because you couldn't stand to see somebody's entire lifetime collection end up in a landfill. Joe had boxes of romance novels from the 70s, textbooks that were 15 editions out of date, and somebody's complete set of encyclopedias from decades ago that she'd accepted last week purely because the old man donating them had looked so hopeful. She was pricing a stack of mystery paperbacks with a label gun that kept jamming when she noticed the streetlights outside were doing that flickering thing they did right before the power decided to quit. And she figured she'd better lock up before she ended up stuck here in the dark with nothing but her phone flashlight and a lot of regret. She was at the front door, fighting with the keys that always stuck when the humidity got bad, when she saw him through the rain-streaked glass. Just some guy walking down the sidewalk in a full suit that was absolutely destroyed by the downpour. No umbrella, no raincoat, nothing. Just walking like he either didn't notice he was completely soaked or didn't care enough to do anything about it. His briefcase was hanging open at a weird angle, like maybe the latch had busted, and she could see papers inside that were probably getting ruined, and he had this expression on his face that Joe recognized immediately because she'd worn it herself plenty of times. It was the look of someone who'd run out of the energy required to care about small things like staying dry or looking professional or any of the surface-level stuff that stops mattering when the big stuff is going wrong. Joe's first instinct was to mind her business, because you don't grow up as a single mom in a town like this without learning when to keep your head down and let people handle their own situations. But then she watched him completely miss seeing a curb and stumble hard enough that he almost went down, catching himself at the last second. And something in her chest just made the executive decision before her brain could talk her out of it. She grabbed her keys and her purse and jogged out into the rain, which immediately soaked through her sneakers and made her regret approximately all of her life choices. "Hey, you all right? You need a ride or something?" she called out over the sound of water hitting pavement, and the guy looked up like he'd genuinely forgotten other people existed in the world. Up close, she could see he was probably mid to late 30s, dark hair that was plastered flat against his forehead, and these eyes that looked like they'd seen way too much of something she couldn't quite identify. He blinked at her a few times like he was trying to process the question. "I'm good, thanks though. I don't live that far from here." But his voice didn't match the words at all. It came out flat and mechanical and exhausted. And Joe had heard that exact tone come out of her own mouth enough times over the years to recognize it for what it was. She pointed at her beat-up Honda parked at the curb, the one with the duct tape holding the back bumper on and the passenger side mirror that had been dangling by a wire for 3 months. "Dude, you're gonna catch pneumonia or whatever. It's literally pouring. Just let me drop you off wherever you're headed. It's seriously not a big deal. I'm already soaked anyway." He did that hesitation thing people do when they're too exhausted to argue, but also too used to handling everything by themselves to accept help easily, and she could see him running through the calculation in his head before he finally just gave up and nodded. They both climbed into her car, and immediately the windshield fogged up completely from the temperature difference. And Joe cranked the defroster to max while he sat there, dripping all over her passenger seat, looking like a lawyer who just experienced the worst day of his professional life. She pulled out into traffic, which wasn't much at this hour, and the silence in the car got weird fast, so she tried to break it with something normal. Rough day at the office? It was kind of a dumb question given that he looked like he'd been through an emotional wood chipper, but she didn't know what else to lead with. And he let out this laugh that didn't have any actual humor in it whatsoever. You could definitely say that, yeah, he said, and his voice had this quality to it, like he was talking from the bottom of a well. Lost a case today that I really thought we had in the bag. Now a kid's going back to a situation that's not safe, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it because the system's got rules and those rules don't care if they make sense. Joe felt something twist in her stomach because she'd been that kid once. The one stuck in a bad situation while adults argued about paperwork and technicalities. And the fact that this random soaked lawyer actually seemed to care about it meant something. She kept her eyes on the road, watching the wipers work overtime against the downpour. That's really heavy. I'm sorry you're dealing with that. What kind of law do you practice? He rubbed both hands over his face like he was trying to physically wipe away the day. Public defender work, mostly family court, custody cases, dependency hearings, termination of parental rights, all the fun stuff that pays basically nothing and destroys your faith in humanity on a weekly basis. Joe's hands tightened on the steering wheel without her meaning them to, because those words were hitting way closer to home than this stranger could possibly know. That's actually wild that you mentioned custody cases, she heard herself saying, which was weird because she didn't usually talk about this stuff with people she just met. I've actually been trying to track down a lawyer who helped me about 7 years ago. It was a custody situation, and I was completely broke and desperate, like calling legal aid offices and getting waitlisted for 6 months, kind of desperate. And this guy took my case anyway, even though I couldn't pay him anything up front. She could feel the words coming faster now, like a dam had broken somewhere. His first name was Benjamin. I only remember that because my daughter asks about him sometimes. She knows there was this person who helped us when we really needed it, and she wants to know his whole name so she can look him up when she's older. But I only met with him maybe twice before everything happened really fast. I got custody of Lily, that's my daughter, and then I had to move across the state for a job that could actually support us both. And in all the chaos, I lost his contact information. I've been searching for him on and off for years, but it's hard when you only have a first name and a really fuzzy memory of what he looked like. She felt almost embarrassed admitting all this to a complete stranger, but something about the rain and the darkness and the fact that she'd probably never see this guy again made it easier to just say it out loud. The lawyer next to her didn't respond the way she expected him to, didn't ask follow-up questions or offer to help her search or anything like that. He just kept staring out the window at the rain, like his brain was processing her words on about a 15-second delay. That's really nice that you want to say thank you, he finally said, but his voice sounded even more hollow than it had before, like he was physically present but mentally somewhere else entirely. Joe glanced over at him. You doing okay over there? Like for real? You seem pretty checked out. He shrugged without looking at her, and she could see his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Honest answer? I'm thinking about quitting. There's this corporate firm that's been trying to recruit me for like 6 months now. Way better salary, actual reasonable hours, cases about contract disputes and liability insurance instead of kids getting hurt. And I'm just so tired of caring this much about things and then watching it not make any difference at all. Joe didn't really know what to say to that, so she just focused on driving, and he gave her turn-by-turn directions to this apartment complex on the east side of town that looked like it had been kind of nice maybe 20 years ago, but had given up somewhere along the way. When she pulled up to the entrance, he grabbed his broken briefcase and turned to look at her, and for the first time since he'd gotten in the car, his expression shifted into something that almost resembled a genuine smile. Thanks for doing this. Seriously. You didn't have to stop for some random wet guy on the sidewalk. Joe waved him off. No worries at all. Hope your night gets better, or at least drier. He laughed for real that time. Just a quick breath of actual amusement. And then he was out of the car and jogging toward the building entrance. And she sat there watching him disappear into the lobby before she pulled back out onto the street. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder with a text from Lily asking if she was on her way home yet, and Joe was fumbling with the screen trying to type back a response when she saw it. A little plastic card sitting on the passenger seat right where the soaked lawyer had been, partially hidden under the seatbelt buckle. She picked it up and angled it toward the light from the street lamp outside, and her entire heart just stopped dead in her chest. It was a gym membership card, the cheap kind with your photo laminated on the front, and staring back at her was the face of the guy she'd just dropped off with his full name printed in bold letters right underneath. Benjamin Kowalski. Jo sat there in her idling car with the rain hammering on the roof, staring at that card like it might vanish if she blinked too hard. Benjamin Kowalski. The Benjamin. The lawyer who'd fought for her when she'd had absolutely nothing, who'd somehow gotten her custody of Lily when every other attorney in the state had told her the case was too complicated and she couldn't afford their retainer fees. The man who'd sat across from her in a courthouse hallway 7 years ago and promised he'd do everything he could, and then he'd actually done it, and she'd never been able to find him again to say thank you. And she'd just spent 20 minutes in a car with him talking about how she'd been searching for a lawyer named Benjamin, and he'd sat right there next to her with zero recognition on his face, no moment of realization, nothing, because she was probably just one case out of hundreds or thousands, and it had been 7 years and people change. And why would he possibly remember her? Jo looked at the gym card again, at the address printed on the back, and felt something like electricity running through her hands. She finally had a way to find him. After years of dead-end internet searches and calls to legal aid offices that couldn't give out information, she had his full name and a location. The man her daughter had been asking about since she was old enough to understand that someone had saved them when they'd needed it most. Jo tucked the card carefully into her wallet, put the car in drive, and pointed it toward home with her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the rain, because tomorrow she was going to track down Benjamin Kowalski, and she had absolutely no idea if he was going to remember her at all. Jo didn't sleep that night, not really, just kind of laid there staring at her ceiling, while her brain ran through about 17 different versions of how the conversation might go when she found Benjamin Kowalski again. She'd tuck Lily in around 10 and listened to her daughter ask the same question she'd been asking for 3 years now. "Mama, do you think we'll ever find the lawyer man who helped us?" And Jo had kissed her forehead and said something non-committal because she didn't want to get the kids' hopes up in case this whole thing went sideways. But now it was 4 in the morning, and she was wide awake Googling Benjamin Kowalski Public Defender, Pennsylvania on her phone and finding exactly one result that matched. A staff directory for the county courthouse that listed him as working in the family division, which meant she'd been living in the same town as him for 3 years and had no idea. She got Lily off to school the next morning, running on maybe 90 minutes of sleep and 3 cups of coffee that weren't doing much except making her hands shake, and by 9:30 she was parked outside the courthouse, watching people in suits stream through the front entrance. Jo had no plan beyond wait until she saw him and then figure it out from there, which was not her finest strategic moment, but she was operating purely on adrenaline in 7 years of wondering what happened to the person who'd changed her entire life. She sat there for almost 2 hours, long enough that a security guard came over and asked if she was okay, and she'd made up some story about waiting for a friend before he finally wandered off, looking suspicious. It was just past 11 when she saw Benjamin push through the courthouse doors, looking somehow even more exhausted than he had in the rain, tie loosened, jacket slung over one shoulder, and Jo was out of her car before she'd fully decided it was a good idea. She caught up to him halfway across the parking lot, and her voice came out way louder than she meant it to. "Benjamin, hey, wait up a second." He turned around with this confused expression like he was trying to place her face, and she could see the exact moment he recognized her as the woman from the rainstorm. But there was nothing deeper than that. No flash of older memory, just polite acknowledgement. "Oh, hey, did I leave something else in your car? I found my gym card was missing, but I figured I dropped it at home." Jo pulled the card out of her purse and handed it to him, and their fingers brushed for a second, and she felt ridiculous for noticing. "Yeah, you left this, but that's not why I'm here. I need to talk to you about something, and I know this is going to sound completely out of nowhere." He glanced at his watch in that way people do when they're trying to be polite, but also have somewhere else to be. I've got about 10 minutes before I need to be back inside. What's going on? She took a breath that didn't do much to steady her nerves. My name's Joanna Brennan, but 7 years ago, I was Joanna Martinez. I dropped my ex's name and took back my maiden name after everything happened, and you were my lawyer. You fought a custody case for me when I had basically nothing and no one else would take it. You got me my daughter. She watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of recognition. But what she saw instead was this kind of horrible blankness, like he was searching his memory and coming up empty. I'm sorry, I've handled a lot of cases over the years and they kind of blur together. Are you sure it was me? Joe felt something sink in her chest because she'd built this moment up in her head for so long, and in none of those versions had he just straight up not remembered her at all. It was definitely you, Lily Marie Martinez. She was 3 years old. Her biological father was trying to get custody, even though he'd never met her. You worked the case pro bono because I was waitressing and living in my car. We met twice, once at a coffee shop and once at the courthouse right before the hearing. Benjamin's expression shifted into something that looked almost like pain. I believe you. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just don't remember. I'm really sorry. He ran a hand through his hair, and she could see how much this was bothering him. I've probably worked 800 cases in the last 7 years, maybe more. Family court is just nonstop, and after a while the faces and names start to blend. It's not that you weren't important, it's just... He trailed off, and Joe could hear the exhaustion in every word. She felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. It's fine, I get it. You were doing your job, and I was just another case. But for me it was everything. You gave me my daughter, you gave me a future. I've been searching for you for 7 years because Lily asked about you, and I wanted to say thank you and introduce you to her so she could see that the person who saved us was real. He looked genuinely distressed now, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Look, I'm really glad the case worked out for you. That's amazing, but I'm not that person anymore. I don't save people. Most days I can't even save myself from drowning in paperwork and losing cases I should win. Joe felt frustration rising up to replace the disappointment. What are you talking about? You literally saved us. How are you not that person? Benjamin's jaw tightened, and she could see him deciding whether or not to say something real. Because I'm burned out, completely toasted, I lose more cases than I win these days, and every single one takes a piece of me. I don't get back. I'm taking a corporate job in Ohio next month and leaving all of this behind because I can't keep doing it. The words came out harsh and final, and Joe just stared at him. You're quitting? Are you serious right now? He looked defensive. Yeah, I'm quitting. I'm going to go push paper for an insurance company and make actual money and not go home every night feeling like I failed someone. Is that what you want to hear? Joe felt anger flash through her, the kind she usually kept buried. No, what I want is for you to meet my daughter and let her thank you for giving her a stable life. She's 10 years old and she's asked about you since she was old enough to understand what you did. But if you're too wrapped up in your own burnout to spend 1 hour seeing that your work actually mattered, then fine, forget it. She turned to walk away and made it maybe 5 steps before she heard him call after her. Wait, hold on, that's not fair. Joe spun back around. What's not fair is that you don't remember us. What's not fair is that I've spent 7 years trying to find you, so I could tell you that you changed our entire lives, and you're standing here telling me it doesn't matter because you're tired. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated that she was getting emotional in a courthouse parking lot in front of someone who clearly didn't want to be there. Benjamin looked like he'd been punched. I didn't say it doesn't matter. I said I don't remember. Those are different things. And yeah, I'm tired. I'm so tired I can barely function. But that doesn't mean I don't care. They stood there in tense silence for a minute, just staring at each other while people walked past them toward the courthouse entrance. Finally, Benjamin's shoulders dropped. What do you want from me? You want me to pretend I remember you? I can't do that. It wouldn't be honest. Joe wiped at her eyes roughly. I want you to meet Lily, just once. Let her tell you what you did for us. Let her show you the book report she wrote about you in 2nd grade. And then if you still want to run off to Ohio and push paper, you can do that. But at least you'll know that one time you actually made a difference. He looked torn, like he was arguing with himself internally, and she pressed the advantage. You told me in the car yesterday that you're tired of caring and watching it not matter. Well, here's your proof that it mattered. I'm standing right in front of you. Lily exists because you fought for us. Just give me 1 hour. Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough. 1 hour, that's it. And then I need you to let this go because I can't be someone's hero. I'm barely holding it together as it is. Jo nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and pulled out her phone. The bookstore, second chapters on Main Street. Tomorrow after you're done with work, I'll have Lily there. He agreed with a tight nod and walked back toward the courthouse. And Jo stood there in the parking lot feeling like she'd just fought a battle she wasn't sure she'd won. She drove back to the bookstore in a daze, and when she picked Lily up from school that afternoon, she knelt down to her daughter's level. Hey, sweetheart, remember how you always ask about the lawyer who helped us? I found him, and he's coming to meet you tomorrow. Lily's entire face transformed into pure joy, and she threw her arms around Jo's neck hard enough to knock her off balance. And Jo held her daughter tight and prayed that tomorrow would somehow remind Benjamin Kowalski why he'd chosen this work in the first place. Benjamin showed up at second chapters the next evening at 6:15, looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. And Jo watched him through the front window as he stood outside for a solid 30 seconds, clearly debating whether to just bail on the whole thing. Lily had been vibrating with nervous energy since she got home from school, changing her outfit 3 times and organizing the things she wanted to show him into neat piles on the reading table in the corner. And now she was sitting on the floor by the children's section, pretending to read but actually watching the door like a hawk. Jo unlocked it before Benjamin could change his mind and waved him inside, and he walked in with his hands shoved deep in his pockets and his shoulders up around his ears, like he was bracing for something painful. Lily looked up from her book and went completely still, and Jo could see her daughter's brain working overtime, trying to match the real person in front of her with the image she'd built up over years of stories. Benjamin seemed just as uncomfortable, giving this awkward half-wave that would have been funny if the whole situation wasn't so loaded with expectation and hope and the weight of something he couldn't even remember. Jo stepped in before the silence got too weird. Ben, this is Lily. Lily, this is Mr. Kowalski, the lawyer I told you about. Lily stood up slowly, clutching a purple folder to her chest, and her voice came out smaller than usual. Hi, thank you for coming. I made some stuff to show you, if that's okay. Benjamin's expression softened just a fraction, and he nodded, following Lily over to the table where she'd set everything up with the kind of precision only a 10-year-old on a mission could manage. There were drawings spread out in a careful line, and Jo hung back by the counter, giving them space but close enough to hear everything. Lily picked up the first drawing, which was done in crayon on construction paper that had definitely seen better days. I made this when I was 5. Mama told me about you, and I wanted to draw what you looked like. She said you had dark hair, and you wore a tie, and you smiled at her when she was really scared. So I drew that. The picture was classic little kid art, a stick figure with a triangle body and a huge smile, and Benjamin took it with hands that Jo noticed were shaking slightly. This is really good, Ear, he said, and his voice had lost some of that defensive edge from yesterday. Lily beamed and grabbed another drawing, this one more detailed, clearly from when she was older. This one's from last year. I'm better at drawing now. See, I gave you a briefcase because lawyers carry those, and I put you in a courthouse because that's where Mama said you helped us. Benjamin studied the drawing like it was evidence in a case, really looking at it, and Jo saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. Lily wasn't done. She pulled out a whole stack of pictures, years of artwork dedicated to a person she'd never met. And with each one, she explained what she'd been thinking when she drew it, what part of the story her mom had told her that inspired it. And Jo watched Benjamin's face gradually crack open. He set the drawings down carefully and his voice came out rough. You've been drawing pictures of me since you were 5? Lily nodded enthusiastically. Mama said you were a hero, and heroes are important. I wanted to remember you, even though I never met you. Benjamin looked at Jo over Lily's head, and she could see something breaking behind his eyes, some wall he'd built up crumbling in real time. Lily pulled out the purple folder. I also wrote this for school. We had to do a report on someone who inspired us, and I picked you. My teacher gave me an A+, and she put it on the bulletin board for parent night. She handed him the folder, and he opened it to find 3 handwritten pages in careful second-grade cursive with the title My Hero, Mr. Benjamin, decorated with stars and hearts. Benjamin started reading, and Joe could see his lips moving slightly as he processed the words. And she knew what it said because she'd helped Lily write it, had sat at their kitchen table while her daughter dictated the story of how a lawyer she'd never met had fought for her before she was old enough to remember. The report talked about how Mr. Benjamin had made it possible for Lily to have a home and a mom who loved her, how he'd worked for free because helping people was more important than money, how Lily wanted to be just like him when she grew up and make sure other kids didn't have to be scared. Joe watched Benjamin's shoulders start to shake about halfway through the second page, watched him try to hold it together and fail, and then he just put his face in his hands and cried right there at the table in her bookstore. Lily looked panicked and turned to Joe with wide eyes, and Joe came over and put a hand on her daughter's shoulder. It's okay, baby. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy or when they remember important things. Benjamin pulled himself together enough to look at Lily through red eyes. I'm sorry, I'm not sad, I promise. I just forgot why I do this job, why I became a lawyer in the first place. And you reminded me. Lily's face cleared, and she did something that absolutely destroyed what was left of Benjamin's composure. She walked over and hugged him, just wrapped her skinny 10-year-old arms around his shoulders and squeezed. It's okay to forget things. Mama says our brains can only hold so much. But now you remember, right? Benjamin hugged her back and nodded against her shoulder. And when Lily finally let go and wandered off to the kids section to give the grown-ups space to talk, he looked at Joe with devastation written all over his face. I don't remember you. I don't remember your case. I've been doing this job for so long that it all blends together, and I forget that there are real people on the other end of the paperwork. Real kids who grow up and draw pictures and write book reports. And I almost walked away from all of it. Joe sat down across from him. You didn't walk away, though. You're still here. You showed up today even though you didn't want to. That counts for something. He shook his head. I'm still taking the corporate job. I already signed the contract. I start in 3 weeks. Joe felt disappointment settle in her chest, but she kept her voice level. Then I hope it makes you happy, genuinely. But I also hope you know that what you did for us mattered. What you've done for hundreds of families matters. Just because you can't remember all of them doesn't make it less real. They sat in heavy silence for a minute before Benjamin's phone rang, and he glanced at the screen and looked confused. Sorry, this is my office. I should take it. He answered, and Joe watched his expression shift through several emotions in rapid succession: frustration, exhaustion, something that might have been longing. Yeah, I'm aware we're short-staffed. I know there's no one else, but I'm not working cases anymore. I've got 2 weeks left and then I'm done. He listened to whoever was on the other end, his jaw getting tighter. A father with 2 kids and no representation? That's not my problem anymore. Give it to Henderson or literally anyone else. Joe felt something kick in her chest, and before she could stop herself, she reached across the table and put her hand over his phone. Wait, what's the case? Benjamin looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Some single dad trying to get his kids back from foster care. It's messy, and it's going to take months, and I don't have months. Joe held his gaze. You have 2 weeks. You could at least meet with him, get the ball rolling, be the person you were for me. His face twisted. You don't understand. If I take this case, I'll get pulled back in. I won't be able to leave. It's how it always works. Joe leaned forward. Then maybe you're not supposed to leave. Maybe this is the universe or whatever giving you a sign that you still have work to do here. Benjamin stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him fighting with himself. And then he lifted the phone back to his ear. Fine, set up a meeting for tomorrow morning. I'll evaluate the case and see if it's viable. But I'm not making any promises. He hung up and looked at Joe like she'd just pushed him off a cliff. I can't believe I just did that. She smiled despite herself. I can. You're not the kind of person who walks away when someone needs help. You proved that 7 years ago, and you just proved it again. He ran both hands through his hair. This is a mistake. I'm gonna get sucked back in and end up staying and hating myself for it. Joe shrugged. Or you're gonna remember why you started doing this in the first place and find a way to do it without burning out. Either way, at least you tried. 3 months went by before Joe saw Benjamin again, and when he walked into the bookstore on a random Tuesday afternoon in December, he looked different, still tired but lighter somehow, like he'd put down weight he'd been carrying for too long. "Hey, stranger," Joe said from behind the counter where she was processing a donation box, and he grinned. "Hey, yourself. I figured I owed you an update. You did kind of derail my entire career plan." She laughed. "Oh, so this is my fault now?" He leaned against the counter. "Completely your fault. I took that case, the single dad, and it turns out his kids were removed because of a misunderstanding with a mandated reporter. We got them back in 6 weeks, and then another case landed on my desk, and then another, and somewhere in there I realized I didn't actually want to leave." Joe felt warmth spread through her chest. "You stayed?" Benjamin nodded. "I stayed. I also started going to therapy and set actual boundaries with work hours and stopped taking cases home with me, literally and metaphorically. Turns out burnout isn't inevitable if you actually take care of yourself." Who knew? They talked for an hour about his cases and her bookstore and Lily's upcoming school play, and when he left, he hesitated at the door. "We do reading time here on Thursday nights for kids in the neighborhood, free books and snacks. You should stop by sometime if you want." He smiled. "Yeah, I'd really like that." Thursday nights became a regular thing, Benjamin showing up after work to read to groups of kids sprawled on the floor, and Joe would watch him do character voices for picture books and think about how close he'd come to walking away from all of this. They fell into an easy friendship built on shared purpose and quiet understanding, and somewhere between January and March, Joe realized she was falling for him in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with who he actually was. 5 months after that first reading night, Benjamin won a massive case that had taken him 6 months to build, reuniting three siblings who'd been separated in the system. And when the judge read the ruling, Joe and Lily were sitting in the back of the courtroom watching it happen. Afterward, in the courthouse hallway, Lily ran up and hugged him hard enough to nearly knock him over. And when she pulled back, she looked between Benjamin and her mom with that expression kids get when they know something adults haven't figured out yet. "Are you going to stay now, Mr. Ben? Like, stay with us?" Benjamin glanced at Joe, and she felt her heart hammering, and he knelt down to Lily's level. "Yeah, kiddo, I think I'm staying, if that's cool with you guys." Lily grinned. "It's very cool. Mama thinks so too. She smiles at her phone now when you text." Joe felt her face go red. "Lily, oh my God." But Benjamin was laughing and standing up and looking at her with something warm and certain in his eyes. "For the record, I smile at my phone too." They walked out of the courthouse together, the three of them, and Joe thought about rainstorms and gym cards and all the tiny coincidences that had led them here, to this moment where the person she'd been searching for had finally found his way home. Sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. Sometimes a ride in the rain changes everything, and sometimes it takes 7 years and a kid with a purple folder to remind someone why they chose to fight in the first place. If this story reminded you that the work we do matters even when we can't see it, that burnout isn't the end if we're willing to ask for help, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next one.